The Post. The Post. Townships interviews. Don't forget breaking news. The Post, the Post, the Post. Broadcast just
Welcome to the Pulse of the Eastern Townships broadcast. I am William Crooks. Oliver Sacks was one of the most widely read science writers of the 20th century. His books sold millions of copies. Awakenings became a film. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat became a cultural touchstone. For decades, he was assigned in medical schools and university psychology courses as a model of compassionate, illuminating medical writing. Then, in late 2025, The New Yorker published an investigation drawing on Sacks' own private journals, and what it revealed was deeply unsettling. Fabricated patient details, repressed personal demons, and a legacy that now looks very different than it did. To help make sense of it all, I called Stuart McKelvie, a retired psychology professor who spent 41 years at Bishop's University in Lennoxville, Quebec, and who taught Sacks in his own courses. He knows the science, he knows the case studies, and he has some very clear views on what this all means. This is that conversation.
So let's just start. I know your background and everything, but maybe give me a little more detail. When did you retire, and how long were you a psychology professor at Bishop's?
So I started out in 1917, and I officially retired in 2014. So that would be 41 years, and that was what I call, officially working on all the three fronts: committees, research, and teaching, of course.
Okay, and how did this, I guess I'll just lead right into it. How did this Oliver Sacks issue come to your attention?
Well, I think it came to my attention through you. You might have mentioned something about, maybe you wrote to both me and Leo, I'm not sure, but you certainly wrote to me and said something about, could you speak about Sacks and replication or something like that? I didn't know what you were talking about at that point, but that's when I heard about it.
Sure. I talked to Leo about replication. I was hoping the angle for our interview tonight would cover the value of case studies and then maybe also media sensationalization. But maybe first let's talk about what you found out about the whole Oliver Sacks issue.
Okay. So, I think from the way I was taking what you were saying earlier, this to me has turned into a talk all about Sacks, and the technicalities of P and stuff like that might not come into it, if that's okay. I don't know. That could be a separate issue.
Oh, right. This is supposed to be for an audience of laymen. If you could briefly explain, maybe not call it P, but, the criteria that needs to be met for significant results, that could be good. But maybe talk about, what precisely has Oliver Sacks been shown to have done here? Okay,
so maybe I'll start by just mentioning how well known he is. I don't know what you know about Sacks yourself, but he became very well known because over the course of his working life, he published many books, some of which became bestsellers. And probably the most well-known book is called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
Yes, I've heard of that one.
And another one called Awakenings. That was made into a movie and a stage play and even an opera and a film. There are many other books. He's written about 16 books. But the background is that when Oliver Sacks was growing up in England, he lived in a household with parents who were medical people, and they used to regale their children with stories about their cases. And he was educated at Oxford, and then he did his internship in London and California, and then he spent his whole working life in New York City. And very briefly, he wrote a total of 16 books, He wrote also articles for publication in technical journals like the Lancet, but stayed away in the end because he had some trouble getting some of his stuff published, and we can get into that later if you want. But he ended up being well known, and this is where the public might have heard of him, because of his books, and he got many honors for them. So that's his background. I don't know if you want me to get into some of the problems yet, but that's his background, and that's where he was coming from.
Okay, but maybe just to clarify, I mean, he wasn't a clinical psychologist. He didn't do research in the lab, right? How would you describe him?
He was a neurologist. So he has a medical degree, and then he's qualified in neurology and neuropathology. The doc in the sense of doc, I'm a medical doctor.
Sure.
Not a psychiatrist. He's a neurologist.
Okay, so you've given a nice background there. I mean, did he just kind of go into this kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, psychology-related literature as a lark? Like, what were his goals there? Do you know that?
Well, I think what happened was, as a neurologist, he deals with people who have very severe problems of the brain. And what started him off was that he worked in a place in New York City where there were patients who had been there for 40 years because they had suffered 40 years before from something called encephalitis lethargica. I can't even pronounce it.
Wow. Okay, I'll figure it out. Yeah.
Encephalitis lethargica, sleeping sickness, and he was called in as a neurologist. He saw these people because it was their brain. He'd been there for about 40 years, and his goal at that time was simply to try to understand them and get to know them. Unconventional, because doctors tend to use checklists of symptoms and things like that. And he was more interested in what was going on inside their heads if he could possibly get to understand it, because they were pretty well comatose, sitting there tonic. And whole life basically dealing with cases like this, or any other neurological cases, of course. These are the ones he's become less known for.
Okay, now what precisely has he been shown to have fabricated?
Okay, so here's the problem. Briefly as a background, I don't know if I can't remember in psychology if you ever heard of a Russian psychologist called Luria, Alexander Luria.
I didn't know.
No, okay, well, he was a psychologist. He became famous for various books he wrote, one of which was called The Mind of a Numinous. And this was a man called S who had an incredible memory. And he was studied by Luria for something like 30 years, and he wrote this book about him in a narrative style. That's the key point I want to make. And Sachs knew about this book and was very excited by it. And because of what I said earlier about some of these academic-type publications not having much success or even being panned, he decided he would write his cases in the narrative style. So this is when he turned to writing popular things. He wrote them for the New Yorker, individual stories, and then he put them together in books. So the problem arose when he retired. There were kind of mixed reactions to his retirement. He had received doctors of honor, many praises, and some people started to raise some questions that maybe in some ways he tried to kind of sensationalize some of these patients. There's a phrase here, somebody accused them writing as if they were a neurological freak show. And he, of course, didn't see it that way himself. One or two people were a bit concerned that his writing became too sensational and not medical and strict in terms of, scientific writing. So the key point here, I think, as one of the stories, was that these patients he had, he heard that there was a drug called L-Dopa, which had been given to Parkinson's patients, and it helped a lot with their symptoms. And some of the patients he had who were completely comatose also had some Parkinson-type symptoms, such as rapid movements and various other kind of weird tics. He wondered if perhaps giving them L-Dopa might help with their dental problem or comatose. And he actually hesitated for 2 years before he gave it to them because he knew that high doses of L-Dopa could have side effects. Anyway, he gave them L-Dopa in high doses, and this is where they wakened up and moved and spoke, and I wouldn't say it were exactly normal, but it blew off his feet. So when he wrote up their stories, and after he had passed away in 2015, people were writing about him, mainly positively. But there were some people who were saying that some of the things he wrote were maybe just a little too good to be true, and they were throwing some doubts into some of the things he had done.
Okay.
There was even one man who wrote that was a man who recruited his patients for a writing career.
That's pretty witty, yeah.
Yeah. And, it was as if he was writing the supermarket tabloids instead of writing science. So there was this mixed feeling that the overall impression of Stat is that he was a wonderful man. He spent hours with his patients, more than other doctors would do, and that he was a kind of god in their mind. And then, in November 2025 or December 2025, an article appeared in the New Yorker by Rachel Aviv, A-V-I-V. She wrote an article about Zach in which he described what seems to be some errors, to put it mildly, in some of these reports, because he had access to his personal journal, which he had kept every day of his life. And the way she starts her article basically is saying that Zach put a lot of himself into the report of his case studies and gave patients powers that they didn't actually have. And in his journals, Zach admits that he wrote things that were pure fabrication. And here's a quote. He said, "These odd narratives, half report, half imagined, half science, half fable, that with a fidelity of their own, are what I do basically to keep my demons of boredom and loneliness and disappear away."
Wow, okay.
So it was almost as if he, did tell the truth in some cases, but then glossed it over or maybe even exaggerated and lied in other cases. And the question is, why would he have done this? And according to Aviv, the main abomination or the main demon that he was dealing with was his homosexuality. He essentially had repressed all his life, except when he went to California to begin with, he didn't repress it. He had relationships. But it's very interesting that I guess his mother, I don't know if he ever knew he was gay, but it was clear in her opinion, well, we'll come back to that, she thought homosexuality was a disease, and she actually called it an abomination. When she learned that he was probably homosexual, she actually told him that he'd never been born.
Wow.
So you could see why it really would be upsetting to him. And what happened was he went into psychoanalysis with a guy called Lennoxville and was psychoanalyzed by him for his home life. And essentially, I don't know if Schenkel told him to repress it, but professionally, he was told, if it came out that you were homosexual, you probably would have your career ruined. So he repressed it for 40 years, and essentially sublimating that made him want to try to do other things. And he said, this is a quote, he said, "A sense of hideous criminality remains attached to my work." And he said, "The pure fabrications and it's a sort of autobiography. Essentially, I changed my erotic feelings into other sorts of love for my patients, my work, my art, and my thought." The problem that in Aviv's article, it's not clear what details are fabricated and what details are true.
Ah, okay.
And with some ideas I can get to you with you there in a moment about that. But I'll give you an example of what he thinks that you're telling the truth about making things up. So, for example, there's this guy called Leonard, who was a patient in Awakening. And Aviv says that Sachs asked him what encephalitis felt like to him. And he said, aged. Leonard couldn't speak at this time. He would either scratch out individual letters on a slate, or he would copy letters on a board. So he would do it letter by letter. It would take Sachs hours to get paragraph out of them. And he quoted Leonard as saying, I feel hate and deprived like Rilke's Panther, which is a reference to a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke about a panther pacing repetitively in cramped circles around a center in which a mighty whale stands paralyzed. So that's what Leonard said. But when he was writing his first book, Sachs told a friend that he felt like Rilke's image of a caged panther stupefied dying behind bars. It looks as if he'd taken his own feeling and put it into the mouth of Leonard.
Right, sure.
And there was another example where Leonard said to Sachs, I have this horrible feeling inside me of wanting to act, which he called an awful presence, and then be completely unable to act, which is an awful absence. And he said it's a terrible isolation. And we wonder if perhaps, this is Sachs feeling that he wants to express sexuality but he can't do it. This is a speculation. There's another example where there's a lady called Rebecca, and she was pretty well silent. She was suffering, and Sachs claims that he tried all kinds of things with her, and eventually he enrolled her in a theatre group where she excelled. Now that Rebecca, in fact, never was in a theatre group and didn't feel good. She felt useless and she wished she hadn't been born.
Wow.
He definitely distorts that one. And then I'll come to the biggest one in a moment, but I'll pause there because these are just examples of some of the things that was being written about by our brief. So maybe I'll tell you then.
Sure.
And he said it himself, that this most flagrant example of distortion can be found in a report of two low IQ twins. And they had captured in his book called The Twins. And I've got this book, because I'll come back to this later with you, because I used this book in one of my courses. And these guys had been diagnosed in various ways. Some people said they were autistic, some people said they were retarded. But they had been known before Sachs met them as what they called calendar calculators. Do you know what that means?
Yes, it's they're like I've heard the word idiot savant.
Yeah.
So they're able not to do much. They can't tie their own shoes, but if you ask them what day it was in 1492 Wednesday August, they'll know.
And they could tell you they could tell you what the weather was on any day of their life after the age of 4. How that's checked, I don't know. But this calendar calculation was known. And Sachs was in the place where they were incarcerated, if I could use that word. And he found he was sitting there one day with them, and just watching them really, and he would do this for hours on end. He noticed that they seemed to be speaking to each other in numbers, and he listened to them, and he saw them smiling and communicating and just having numbers back and forth. And so he sat there himself aside. He wasn't really with them. He wrote the numbers down, and when he got home, he looked up this book he had at home, because he had this book as a child. It was all about numbers, especially prime numbers. And Sachs was a child, he was really interested in prime numbers. And he could never figure them out. He couldn't find a formula for them. And he suddenly thought, my goodness, all these numbers that these twins are exchanging are prime. Well, I've got to look into this further because there were 6-digit numbers. And he went back the next day and he sat down beside them and actually joined them, and they kind of looked at him rather strangely. He just sat there and they were exchanging numbers. So he decided to offer a number, and because they'd been exchanging 6 digits rather, he offered them an 8-digit number. And he said it took them 5 minutes, but then each of them produced a 9-digit number. And then Sachs does this, I've got a quotation. He said, at my turn, after a third critical look at my book, added my own rather dishonest contribution, a 10-digit prime that I found in my book. And then he said, the twins continued on until they were exchanging 20-digit numbers. And Sachs says, I couldn't check whether they were primes or not because my book didn't go beyond 10, but yet still they were. So he makes a big thing of this in his book, obviously, and it's a very interesting case. But the question is that he raises this and other people have tried to look into it. And one guy goes to him and says, what's the book? We'd love to know about that book. And then, this is years and years later, because Sachs' book was published in 1985, 20 years actually after he'd seen the twins. And he says, I don't have the book anymore, and I actually have lost my sourcing. So nobody could really check this book, and some people are worried what does this exist? So there was a book at all.
Right.
I discovered a source myself, actually. A guy called Van Earth, 2012, said he found a book published in 1914 that might have been Sachs' book, but it doesn't go up to 10 digits. It only goes up to 8.
Right.
I don't really know. So the issue is, I mean, with these twins, were they really exchanging primes or not? And there's some doubt about whether they were giving primes after 8. It might have been, but the Sachs just making this up because he was so interested in primes. We wonder, whether he was inventing what he did, because he did say that this was his greatest distortion. Without going into details, this is the problem. He doesn't exactly say what is distortion and what is not the distortion.
Okay, well, what does that mean for, I guess it casts a shadow over, I would assume, are very, very many professors that brought him up as a legitimate source in university. What do you think the implications of that are?
Well, I'll give you two answers to that. One is, his book was assigned at medical school because there is a debate in medicine between what you might call purely technical scientific writing and then a more kind of story-like writing. In fact, Luria himself said that two ways of science, you could do what you call romantic science, where you put things into stories, but of course you give the facts, or you do what you call clinical science, where you just stick to the facts and it's all statistics and numbers. I can maybe introduce my own story here, which is that in my applied memory and cognition course, I had assigned as reading this chapter by Sachs, and the chapter on the twins I'm talking about. And I remember I went back to my lecture notes, I still have them, and they were supposed to read it themselves, but I actually quoted this in the lecture. Then John brought out a 9-digit number, and Michael responded with a similar one. And then I, in my turn, after surreptitious looked at my book, I did my own rather dishonest contribution, a 10-digit prime that I found in my book, which I already quoted to you. And I love that quotation because it was unbelievable to think that they were doing this, and he was admitting his embarrassment that he was kind of lying to them as if he was generating primes himself when he wasn't. But now I realize that I might have misled my students about Sachs, because Sachs' admission of misleading the twins seems very honourable, because he feels bad about it. He said that in quote, that maybe he's misleading us. Was he inventing facts?
Right.
Own early desires. And here's the other interesting thing, and this is where, this is exactly values, but it's something to do with research methods. He's been thinking scientifically. He could have given them some numbers that he knew were not primes. He could have come up with an 8 or 9 digit number, which was definitely not a prime, to see what their reaction would be. It's like a control group. If they reacted in the same way, then maybe they weren't generating primes. The lower down numbers they were for sure, but maybe higher up they weren't, because nobody knows anybody in the world who can generate primes above 6. And the other thing they could do is very interesting. He said there was a box of matches on the table and it fell open and all the matches spilled on the floor. And immediately they said 111. 37, 37, 37. So not only did they say there was 111 matches, they factorized it into 37. And in fact, counted the matches and he said there were 111. So the thing is, somebody knows, well, where did the match come from? He doesn't say, did they bring it in or did he bring it in? Because if they brought it in, maybe they'd already counted the number.
Right, sure, yeah.
There are other autistic people who can do this. There are people in history who have been able to instantly look at a bunch of clues and tell you how many clues there are. There are claims that others can do it. But what Sachs should have done, he should have brought some peas in that he brought, or he should have brought some matches that he brought, tested them. He wasn't in the testing business. He wanted to enter their heads. He wanted to write stories about them. He wasn't really thinking like a hard-nosed experimental psychologist like you and me.
Right. Okay. Okay, great. Well, maybe let's just wrap up with, what typically would you say is the value of case studies to psychology? I mean, do researchers get ideas off them? Like, what would you say they're for?
That's an excellent question. The case study, as you probably know, is a recognized. Did you do my research methods course? I can't remember.
I'm pretty sure I did, but it was a while ago, so.
You would have had to have done stats first, then you had to do research methods.
Right.
There's all these methods. There's naturalistic observation. There's case studies. There's experiments. There's all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And the case study is an N of 1. And its major advantage is that you get to know that case really, really well. Unlike most studies where you just get one little behavior out of people.
Sure.
And the disadvantage is that you don't know how it applies to anybody else, which is where replication comes in. And then you can use it as a stepping stone when you ask, what's the value? Well, somebody else can read your case, know what you did, and then can go and see if they can find another case. And the other great thing about case studies is they can be a test case. For example, if somebody's got a claim that is supposed to apply to everyone, if you have a case and that particular claim doesn't apply, you rejected the theory. All you need is an N of 1.
Right, of course. Yeah. The counterfactual. Yeah.
The counterfactual, because there was a theory at one time that people who were unable to speak couldn't really understand language. That's what it was. I wrote this down. Where is it? Here it is. There was a hypothesis that understanding language requires that we must be able to hear ourselves speak. So if you can't hear yourself speak, you'll never be able to understand language.
Okay.
And this guy, Lennoxville, found a boy who could not speak, but he could understand language.
Right.
So that means that theory is wrong. And this is why the thing about the twins is so critical, because people said nobody can generate prime numbers above 6. And here's these twins doing it. And so that would reject that claim. But if he's telling us a lie and they couldn't do it, the whole thing falls apart.
Right, of course, yeah.
Well, case studies are great because they get detail, but you want to know if you could generalize. What you can do, if you find something interesting, you can use them as a stepping stone. And in fact, even Max himself has said, what I do is I accumulate cases and I leave the theorizing to others. He wanted to build cases and let others do the analysis of what it all meant.
Sure.
And here's the other funny thing. He actually wanted to be like Freud. He actually saw himself as wanting to be like Galileo and Freud and become famous for his cases. Never for his theories, because he never had any theories. But he wanted to be like Freud, and it's a real kind of irony to me that he went through 40 years of psychoanalysis with Shengo, and still all this stuff was suppressed.
Okay, well, interesting. Is there any important aspect that my questions missed that you might want to add on, or something I'm thinking of is maybe, what can the psychological community do to guard against this? It seems like there's not really a lot you can do, because he was a particular, he was a real doctor, he was a real neurologist, and if you're not going to trust a guy like him,
I know.
Right? What are you going to do, right? Yeah.
Well, the only thing you can do is to try to, if he says something, try and see if you can find some case to replicate it. See, the interesting thing about Sachs is, initially he was trying to publish these cases from Awakenings in the Lancet. Usually it was left to the editor. But he did some technical papers, and he actually says in a video that I've seen him talk about this, he said, in papers they want you to have all kinds of cases, statistics, analyses and stuff like that. And he did write up a paper like that, I think, for either the Lancet or for the Journal of the American Medical Association. And they rejected his paper. And I don't know why. He was upset about it, but maybe it wasn't good enough, And the problem is, if he's not honest in his reporting, it's difficult to know because you don't know what to replicate. The way they try to do this today sometimes with science is you do a pre-announcement of what you're going to do. I don't know if we were talking about that when we were talking about replication. You propose what you're going to do and you make it public. That I'm going to do this, these are the methods I'm going to use, this is what I'm going to test, and these are the steps I'm going to use to analyze my results. And then you do it, and then you do the results analysis, and then when you publish it, you've already said in advance what you're going to do. And so you have to be honest. Most people are honest, but there have been fakes, as you know, in science.
Sure.
And I feel torn about that because he seemed to be a really genuinely caring human being who spent hours with these people, but yet so troubled that he had to distort in order to solve his personal problems. But you have I think there's a mixed kind of, shall we say, verdict on him now. That he can be admired for his writing. He can be admired for his compassion. He can be admired for his commitment to his patients. But there's no room in reporting of any kind for not telling the truth, because then you don't know what anything means, and when doubt is there, then you don't know what to believe.
Okay, great, Stu. Would there happen to be a nice picture of you I could use with the article, or maybe I should use Sachs?
Yeah, you could probably use Sachs since you're talking about Sachs. There's all kinds of pictures. If you go online, you can get pictures of him as a young man in California with his motorbike and black leather.
Oh, wow, okay.
I don't know if that's the one you want to show. I think you want to show him as an elder statesman.
Right.
Bald head, a huge bushy beard. He looked like a rabbi.
Okay.
His glasses. That's the kind of iconic picture of Oliver Sacks. A kind, gentle, good old Jewish boy who is a caring neurologist. Because that's the image I think that he has in people's mind.
Okay, I got one more little thing I thought of. Does this New Yorker article spell the death knell of Oliver Sacks ever being used in the academy again?
In the academy, probably yes, because really we don't know what is true and what is not true. But what's interesting is there are some people who still think we have a more kind of romantic type of science in medical writing. So it still stands as a beacon of beautiful medical writing, because some of the things he said are probably absolutely true. I mean, in book Hallucinations, which I have myself actually, it's a fantastic book about hallucinations. Some of his cases are his, but some of them are not his. And it's a really interesting read. So as a narrative medical storyteller, I think he can be still admired. And for the human being that he was with his patients, he can be admired. But I think he gets 0 out of 100 for science.
That was Stuart McKelvie, retired professor of psychology at Bishop's University, speaking with me by phone in the Eastern Townships. If you found this conversation valuable, please consider subscribing to The Pulse. We're an independent English language news publication covering the Eastern Townships, and every subscription directly supports this kind of local and regional journalism. Thanks for listening. I'm William Crooks. This is The Pulse of the Eastern Townships broadcast, and always remember to keep your finger on the pulse.
The Post. Townships interviews. Don't forget breaking news. The Post, the Post, the Post. Broadcast just for you. Are you heading out for a cruise? Or lying there for a snooze? The Post, the Post, the Post.